Greetings everyone, my name is ICEY, and I'm here today to talk about a game called ICEY. So, the reason I played this game in the first place is because I saw Total Biscuit's After Hour on it, during which he gave it a very glowing recommendation. The basic gist of what he said is that it's sort of like the Stanley Parable meets Bayonetta, I believe were his exact words. A hack-and-slash beat-em-up game with a lot of fourth wall-breaking meta-narrative elements, a la something like the Stanley Parable or Undertale. And like I said, he gave it a very glowing review. He was very positive. He said, "Oh man, this is not just an ordinary, beat-em-up game. This game makes you think. It blows my mind with how incredibly, detailed the plot is." And he bigged up the plot quite a bit in his after-hour review of it. And, me being a lover of the meta-narrative style of game, things like Pony Island, things like Undertale, I decided, well, I'll give it a shot then. Sounds like my kind of game, right? So I gave it a shot. I played through the entire game, and, I don't see it. I'm sorry. I have to completely disagree with Total Biscuit here. So, first of all, let's get the good stuff out of the way. The OST is incredible. Fucking great. I'm totally going to buy that just as soon as this video is done. The art style of the game, fantastic. The game is set in, a cyberpunk future, but also, an apocalypse setting. So there's cyberpunk technology alongside, bombed out buildings that have given way to time and plants everywhere and things are wrecked and shit. It's a very unique art style. The main character, ICEY herself, is a very anime art style, which does stick out a lot from everything else in the game, the way everything else is drawn. All the other characters are robots that almost look CG-ish, and so ICEY kind of looks out of place, but honestly, I never minded that, and ICEY's design is very appealing, because, I'm a huge anime fan, so it's whatever. I like it. I think the art in this game is just generally great. I am a huge fan of Cyberpunk, so the fact this game is a Cyberpunk game, and just such a beautiful Cyberpunk game at that. So if you're in it for the scenery porn aspect, I can totally recommend the game for that, if nothing else. Next up, the gameplay is okay, I guess. Combat flows well for the most part, although things do tend to become a mess, especially in the bigger fights later on in the game. And oftentimes what'll end up happening is that ICEY has this move she can perform on almost dead enemies, where she, does this really flashy big attack that kills them and also restores a bit of her health. So you perform that attack by mashing B. And then you can charge up a giant sword swing, which will damage all enemies on the screen after you've performed that attack. So often what'll happen is that you kill an enemy, you get some health back, then you charge your sword attack, you use your sword attack, the sword attack damages a different enemy, which you can then go over to and press B, and you get in this cycle of killing the enemy's core, then using the charge attack, then killing the other enemy's core, then using the charge attack, then killing the other enemy's core and using the charge attack. And so in some of the bigger battles, combat just evolves into doing that over and over again. And that can get a bit repetitive. I do think, however, one of my complaints about the combat is that there's slowdown whenever you use a big attack, right? So when the game wants to emphasize how much, an attack just hurt the enemy, the game will slow down whoa, slow motion to give you more time to appreciate how badass the attack was. But again, going back to that slashing at the enemy's core and using the charge attack thing, both of those attacks have slowdown, and so when the combat devolves into press B to slash enemy's core, hold X to charge attack, then oftentimes the battle descends into a slow motion mess, and it can take forever just to finish one combat encounter. The game does have light RPG elements that I quite like. Basically, every enemy that you kill drops a small amount of cash, which you can spend to upgrade stations to upgrade ICEY's various combat abilities. I was a bit disappointed that the vast majority of the upgrades are just increase the damage of this attack, rather than change anything about the way the attack works fundamentally. That said, these are pretty minor nitpicks. The game is only 3 hours long, so despite the fact that there aren't a huge variety of different moves to perform, it doesn't really last that long, so I don't really have an issue with that. The game is short, sweet, and snacky, and so the lack of variety doesn't ever really get that repetitive. Now, moving on to the actual problems I have with the game, and these are mostly in the story aspect of things. First of all, before we dive directly into the meta-narrative thing, I do want to note that I don't think the gameplay and the story blend very well together. And I'm talking about purely from a mechanical approach here. Like, the narrator, who speaks Chinese, by the way, will start ranting to you about all this plot stuff, and you'll be way too busy paying attention to the gameplay, the stuff that's happening on screen, to bother paying attention to the subtitles. So it'll be like, ah, yes, you are the chosen one, and you were supposed to follow everything I said, blah, 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 blah. And there's a bajillion explosions happening on screen at once, and you're trying not to die, so you can't really pay attention to anything he says. And oftentimes he'll just continue talking on and on and on. And you're like, okay, dude, can this wait until I'm done fighting this room full of monsters who are trying to kill me? Just hold off on this impassioned speech for just a few seconds, please. Okay, so on to the whole meta aspect of the game, which is what really interested me and what made me want to give the game a try. Because I've never been a huge fan of, side-scrolling beat-em-ups, but like I said, the Cyberpunk aesthetic appealed to me, and the idea that it was like a fourth wall-breaking meta-commentary thing appealed to me. So, let's talk specifically about that. Again, I tried this game originally because of Total Biscuits After Hour, during which he really bigged up the plot. He was like, oh man, this is so amazing. The plot makes you think so much and it blows your mind, and just, yeah, no, it didn't do any of that. Basically, if you've played the Stanley Parable, you've seen pretty much everything this game has to offer. The narrator in this game will say, follow the arrow, and the narrator in the Stanley Parable says, go left at this door, and you disobey, the narrator in this game, and he starts yelling at you, and you disobey the narrator in the Stanley Parable, and he starts yelling at you in exactly the same way. Like, nothing this game does, I'd say, is really original, or is something that hasn't been done before. And it's possible that I've just played too many of these meta-narrative games, but I do think ICEY specifically is subpar compared to most. Like, when you progress to a new room, the narrator will have one permutation of about 3 total topics. Either he'll say, here are some enemies, or Judas is a dick, or keep following the arrows. And keep following the arrows specifically is overemphasized by him to the point of near parody. Like, he'll say something like, ICEY continued to follow the arrows, for she knew that the arrows would never lead her astray. ICEY continues to follow the arrows, for ICEY knows that the arrows are the way to go. And then in the next room he'll say, ICEY continues to follow the arrows, and just, dude, I get it, you're wanting me to follow the arrows, please shut up about it. And one of the things I realized while playing this game is that doing what the narrator says in these fourth wall-breaking metagames is now the new not doing what the narrator says. Like, he'll say, ICEY continued to follow the arrows, and I can feel the game's disappointment as I do exactly what the narrator says, instead of, going down the very obviously signposted other path. So, in a way, by doing exactly what the narrator says, I'm fulfilling the desire of not doing exactly what the narrator says. Because you can tell the game designer wants you to go down that second path. The narrator may say, you must follow the arrows, but it's pretty obvious the game designer wants you to go not follow the arrows, to go down that other path so you can think he's avant-garde and doing something interesting with the medium and saying all these wonderful, mind-blowing things. So, the new version of not listening to the narrator and these kinds of games, I've realized, is now just listening to the narrator. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, everything that ICEY does from a meta-narrative breaking aspect, I've seen done before and done better. The creator talking about the development of the game, the Stanley Parable did it better. Disobeying the narrator and him getting mad at you for doing so. Pony Island did it better. A final boss fight with the narrator. The Judge of All the Earth from Poacher was way more interesting, because you actually fought the narrator in that, not just enemies that you fought throughout the entire game that the narrator spawned in. And I don't think this is just a case of, oh, the Stanley Parable came out first and therefore I like it more. Because the thing with ICEY is that because it's both a hack and slash brawler and a meta-narrative fourth wall breaking game, it spends the vast majority of its time focusing on the combat, and then has very, very little time left to explore anything with the ideas that it does have. So it's not just that I've seen the ideas done before, but the ideas were also done better in these other games. So even if ICEY had come out before the Stanley Parable, I think I still would have liked the Stanley Parable more. I think the fourth wall breaking meta aspect of ICEY is by far the weakest part of the game, and if you're looking for that, I'd say you probably should keep looking. The game's only $10, so if you want a very pretty cyberpunk beat-em-up, then ICEY is definitely worth it for that. But if you're looking for something bringing innovative ideas to the table, things like Pony Island, like Undertale, like the Stanley Parable, then you should probably look somewhere else.